Hello, my name is Brianna Glazer, and this is my discussion about the podcast that we had to listen to called Perfect Son. So, the first question asks Jason Kim spoke vulnerable about his relationship with his father. What was Jason's perception of his father, and what is Jason's father's perception of Jason? So, after listening to the podcast, I came to the conclusion. So, when Jason was growing up, his dad was his favorite person ever. He looked up to him, he enjoyed his company, and when Jason's dad came home from work, he was so happy to see him because that was his hero. That's who he loved to be with when he was growing up. When they moved to the US, his dad seemed more depressed and he started to slowly stop talking, and before you knew it, Jason's dad just completely stopped talking. So the way Jason perceived his dad in his early childhood as his hero, as the person he looked up to, changed when they moved to the US, where Jason began to see his dad as a quiet, reserved man who kind of forgot about Jason, who no longer really cared about Jason. When the podcast came to an end, Jason's perception of his father changed again. He saw his father as someone who wanted to protect his son, someone who just wanted to show love, but someone who didn't know how to show it. The way Jason's dad perceived Jason was differently. Jason's dad used to see him as his perfect son, but after coming out, that was not the case anymore. At least that's what Jason thought. Jason thought that since he was gay and he came out, his dad no longer saw him as his perfect son, and his perception changed. But as also when the podcast came to an end, Jason realized that his father perceives him as a strong man who follows his dreams and who is doing something with his life, someone who is making his family proud. As far as question 2 goes, during the podcast, there are several examples of selection: attention, perception, memory, organization. Give examples of how Jason's selection led him to his perception about his father. So there's 2 things that I really caught in this podcast in terms of selection. I saw a lot of selective attention on Jason's part, and I saw a lot of low cognitive complexity on Jason's parents' part. So in terms of selective attention, selective attention can be defined as the process of concentrating on one part of the environment while not paying attention to the rest. Jason thought that since his dad stopped talking to him as much after he realized he was gay, that his father no longer wanted to be a part of Jason's life because he thought he was being a disappointment by coming out as a gay man. So by only paying attention to the silence between himself and his dad, he did not realize that his dad actually really does care for him and wants the best for him. So the selective attention kind of hindered his relationship with his father. Another part of the podcast talked about how Jason felt as if he was everything his parents did not want. He was gay instead of straight, or he was a writer instead of a doctor. And his dad and mom kind of disappeared because of this. So this, in my opinion, shows low cognitive complexity, and the definition of cognitive complexity is individuals with highly developed interpersonal contract systems. And his parents, based on what Jason thought, did not see this because they only saw him as one thing rather than someone who has multiple characteristics and someone who can be a diverse person regardless of who he wants to be, a writer, a doctor, or if he's gay or straight. So I saw a lot of low cognitive complexity on his parents' side. For question 3, it asks, did stereotypes play a role in the way Jason thought of the world and how his parents viewed him? Based on what Jason thought, yes, there was stereotypes in the way. Jason thought that his parents were disappointed in him because he was gay. He believed his parents stereotyped all gay men as people who can't be successful and people who are a disappointment and disgrace to his family. So he took this stereotype that he thought his parents thought of him, and it changed the way he saw the world, and it changed how he went about his life, because he was scared that his parents were disappointed in him because he was gay, and it was a stereotype of being gay that his parents, so because of the stereotype, his parents and their relationship also distanced. But as the podcast came closer to the end, he realized that this wasn't a stereotype that his dad followed. It was something that he used selective attention to think about, and it was not the case. So for question 4, what was the script Jason developed regarding his father's perception of him? So, since Jason feared disappointment from his dad, he stopped actively calling him regularly. He was scared of calling his dad because he wanted to date men and he wanted to party, and he thought this would be a reason to be, he thought that this was the reason his dad stopped communicating with him, when in reality, Jason realized it was because of his actions, the reason he stopped calling, because he was scared that his dad would be disappointed in him, but that wasn't the case. He stopped calling regularly, and when they did talk, it was only about either the weather or his dad's car, and this became a regular script that Jason followed. A short conversation under 1 minute that usually didn't consist of anything meaningful. It was just little small talk, and it was a script he built between his dad because he worried that he was going to disappoint his dad if the topic of his identity came up, of him being gay. Question 5. What is Jason's self-concept? So I believe, through what I watched, Jason finds himself as a strong man who is bubbly and active, and I think he takes great pride in who he is, and he feels like he's a good writer, but he felt weak when it came to his dad, so he was scared that he wasn't good enough for his dad, and when it came to the relationship with his dad, he didn't feel as worthy as he does rather if he's with someone else. So depending on who he was with, who he communicated with, Jason's self-concept changed. When he was with his friends, he saw himself as a successful, strong man, but when he was with his dad, he felt weak and he felt like he was a disgrace. And so that kind of changed throughout the podcast, and it was like character development I saw personally as I kept watching the podcast. So for question 6, how does Jason's relational self affect his self-concept? So around his friends define him as an outgoing, loud, and bubbly, successful person. But around his dad, he is more reserved due to fear of judgment and disappointment. So a relational self is a process of constantly becoming who you are as a result of togetherness with others. For example, the way you act around your friends is different than the way you act around your teacher. It's just what relational self is. So, like I said before, around his friends he was outgoing and bubbly, but when he came around his family, he was more quiet and reserved, once again, which stemmed from the fact that he was scared of judgment and disappointment that he was going to get from his father. But that was not the case, because he lacked communication with his dad, and because of this, he didn't realize that his dad really wasn't disappointed about the fact that he was gay, and that just wasn't the case. For question 7, do you think culture played a role in Jason's perception of himself? I personally think that culture did play a role, because being immigrants from Korea, being gay was considered very different and eccentric, because back in Korea, it was very rare for a man to come out as gay. So when Jason moved to America and his family moved to America and he came out as gay, based on the culture he was grown up in, he thought that his parents and his family would no longer accept him, because being gay in his culture was very rare, and that kind of broke down his self-perception, because he thought he wasn't good enough because of his sexuality. Question 8. What is the realization by the end of the episode, and how does that alter Jason and his father's relationship? Jason realized it was because of his dad he was able to be a writer, because his dad told his mom that allowing Jason to follow his heart would make him the best version of himself. Jason finally realized at the end that it wasn't because he was gay that his dad stayed quiet and all of that. It was because Jason's dad was trying to protect him. He didn't want to take Jason's kidney because it wasn't because he was gay and he was bad and his kidney was bad. It was because he wanted to protect Jason. He felt as though if he took Jason's kidney, Jason would not be as healthy. And to him, that was so scary. He wanted his son to be healthy and to prosper as a human being. And he believed by taking his kidney, it would ruin Jason's life. So it wasn't, like I said before, it wasn't because that Jason's dad believed his kidney was spoiled because he was gay. It was actually because his dad wanted the best for his son. He didn't want his son to get sick and risk his son's health out of selfishness. So at the end, they were finally able to grow and build their relationship together. They grew stronger because through communication, Jason finally sat down with his dad and they finally talked. And Jason asked him all the questions he had, like, why won't you accept my kidney? And finally, Jason got the answers he needed, although it wasn't exactly what he wanted to hear, because Jason's dad still didn't want to take his kidney. He finally realized it wasn't because he was gay, and to him, that was an eye-opening experience. They were able to bond more because Jason felt like he could be who he was around his dad, because he finally realized through communication and asking questions that he could be who he wanted in front of his family. Lastly, in one word, summarize the episode. If I could summarize the episode, I would summarize it as revolutionary, because the definition of revolutionary is involving or causing a complete or dramatic change. In the beginning, Jason feared his dad. He feared that he was a disappointment. He feared that he wasn't enough. But at the end, through communication and proper talking techniques, he finally realized through a dramatic change that he is enough, and all of this distance between his dad saying no to his kidney, it was all because his dad just truly wanted the best for his son. Thank you for listening to my discussion. I hope this helped.